What if the person plotting your downfall isn't a stranger in the shadows, but someone you've laughed with, shared meals with, maybe even trusted with your secrets? What if the danger doesn't scream, doesn't strike, but smiles and waits? We like to believe we'd recognize true evil when we see it, that it would wear a mask, raise its voice, reveal itself in moments of rage. But the reality is far colder. The most dangerous people don't come crashing in. They slip through unnoticed. They take notes. They build trust. And then they destroy. In this video, we're not talking about drama. We're talking about survival. These are the 5 psychological warning signs that someone may not just dislike you, but may actually be planning your erasure, emotionally, financially, or even physically. And the scariest part? You probably already know them. Stay with me, because awareness might be the only thing that stands between you and becoming their next story. Subscribe now. This isn't entertainment. This is protection. Sign 1. They're studying you. The beginning of a betrayal almost never feels like one. There's no warning siren, no trembling ground. Often, it feels like attention, like someone noticing you, remembering small details, asking questions that seem thoughtful, showing up often enough that it begins to feel normal, safe. But here's the truth. The most dangerous people in your life are not the loud ones. They're the quiet observers. They don't strike out of rage. They don't act impulsively. They watch. They learn. They study. Slowly, methodically, patiently. This is what psychologists call pre-offense surveillance, the phase where predators collect information rather than act. And in the modern age, that study doesn't require binoculars or blacked-out vans. All it takes is your digital trail. The posts you make without thinking. The check-ins you tag automatically. The routines you share with the world without realizing it. We assume that surveillance is external, but in truth, it's personal. And what makes this tactic so insidious is how ordinary it looks. It doesn't feel like stalking. It feels like someone being interested in you. A friend who just happened to see your car parked outside. A coworker who remembers what time you always leave. A neighbor who seems to know your weekend plans. You dismiss it at first, but the Stoics would urge you not to. Epictetus once said, "Be watchful, for you do not know when you are being watched." Stoicism is not about living in fear. It is about being honest with yourself. About seeing clearly, without flattery or illusion. A Stoic does not panic when danger approaches. But a true Stoic also does not ignore its signs. Consider the tragedy of Julius Caesar. His death wasn't sudden. It was orchestrated, and not by strangers, but by men he trusted. Brutus, perhaps the most famous traitor in history, didn't scream rebellion. He observed, he listened, he planned. For years, he knew Caesar's mind, his weaknesses, his schedule, and most of all, his blind trust in those closest to him. The Ides of March wasn't just a date. It was the result of long, silent surveillance dressed in loyalty. Caesar's mistake wasn't trusting the wrong man. It was not paying attention to how close that man had gotten. Betrayal is rarely loud. It whispers, and sometimes it smiles. From a Stoic lens, this kind of vigilance is not paranoia. It's responsibility. Marcus Aurelius warned us not to waste time expecting the world to be fair. Instead, he said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Humans. In other words, you may not control how others behave, but you are fully responsible for how awake you are to patterns. And here's a pattern worth noticing. When someone is watching too closely without a reason, when they appear in your orbit more often than they should, when they ask too many questions that go beyond what friendship requires, pay attention. Because what they're gathering is not trivia, it's leverage. They're learning what makes you tick when you're alone, how you move, where you're vulnerable, and especially in the digital world, they don't need to follow you physically to follow you entirely. Your public photos show your schedule, Your tagged locations reveal your routines. Even fitness apps that track your steps can become weapons in the wrong hands. And the most chilling part? They are often not strangers. These observers wear familiar faces. Family members, ex-partners, old friends, co-workers, people with just enough access to study you without raising alarm. And once they've collected enough, they don't always act immediately. No, they wait for the perfect storm. When you're isolated, tired, distracted, or emotionally vulnerable. The Stoics taught that true peace comes not from false safety, but from inner clarity. He is a wise man, Seneca said, who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. But that kind of wisdom also means protecting what you do have, your privacy, your schedule, your instincts. And that begins with unpredictability. Change your routines. Stop announcing your plans online. Delay your social media posts. Review your privacy settings. Turn off your location tagging. Stop living your life like an open map for others to trace. Because every habit you repeat becomes a thread someone else can pull. Every pattern you keep becomes a path they can walk, undetected. Here's what they don't tell you. Predictability is comforting to you, but it's a weapon to them. There's a reason so many people, especially older adults, report a lingering feeling of being watched only after the damage is done. They felt it, but dismissed it. They told themselves they were overreacting, that it wasn't that serious, that they shouldn't be dramatic. And so they silenced the only alarm that might have saved them. Do not silence yours. Your instincts are not weaknesses. They are ancient tools of survival. Stoicism isn't the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of attention. And nothing is more dangerous than ignoring what you were meant to notice. So if you sense someone watching, not out of love, but with silent calculation, believe yourself, question, observe, adjust. The Stoic doesn't live in fear, but they never sleepwalk through danger either. Because sometimes the difference between being paranoid and being prepared is your life. Sign 2. They build a trap with love. Sometimes the most lethal attack doesn't come with anger, but with affection. It doesn't raise a fist, it opens its arms. And it doesn't demand your attention by force. It whispers, "I'm here to help you." This is the second, and perhaps most psychologically devastating sign that someone may not just wish you harm, but may be quietly building the perfect conditions to erase you. Not by striking directly, but by dismantling your defenses from the inside out. This is the predator in the disguise of the caregiver, the manipulator who cloaks control in concern and dependency in devotion. It begins after a loss, a moment of vulnerability, a season of confusion or grief. That's when they show up, helpful, attentive, emotionally available. They say all the right things, offer all the right gestures, and you, exhausted or overwhelmed, begin to lean on them. It feels like relief, but what you don't see is that they are not easing your burden. They're restructuring your reality. We see this in the story of Thomas, a retired man in his 60s who lost his wife and, with her, his sense of purpose. In the hollow of that loss, a woman named Claire appeared. She was kind, consistent, called him every night, cooked, helped with errands, encouraged him to rest, to let go, to let her take care of things. And slowly, imperceptibly, she began to take care of everything. She discouraged him from reconnecting with old friends, said they didn't understand what he was going through. She sowed doubt about his adult children, suggested they might have ulterior motives. She reminded him, daily, how fragile he had become. And soon, Thomas no longer made decisions without her. Not about his finances, not about his health, not about his time. By the time he realized how trapped he had become, it was too late. He hadn't spoken freely in weeks. His voice, his will, had been silenced by comfort. This is the anatomy of emotional manipulation, and it is no less dangerous than a weapon. Stoic philosophy warns us against confusing the appearance of good with the essence of it. We must not be deceived by the mask of kindness, Seneca writes, but look at the intentions behind the act. Real virtue is not how someone behaves when you're strong, but what they do when you're weak. A true friend empowers. A manipulator softens you to extract control. At the core of this manipulation are three psychological weapons: vulnerability, dependency, and isolation. The predator identifies where you're hurting, your loneliness, your guilt, your self-doubt, and then offers themselves as the only solution. They position themselves as irreplaceable, the sole person who truly sees you. And once that bond forms, they begin removing others from your life. Quietly, strategically, with the excuse of protecting you. They say your friends are toxic. Your family is unreliable. They're the only one who really cares. But what they're doing is cutting the safety lines, removing everyone who might pull you back into clarity. And here's where the Stoic mind must step in. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When someone plants doubt in your mind every day about others, about your strength, about your memory, they are not just speaking. They are coloring your soul. They are reshaping how you perceive reality. And eventually, you become the person they've told you that you are. Weak, confused, dependent. But none of that is true. It's just the version of you that serves them best. It's important to note, this trap doesn't always end in literal death, but it always ends in the death of autonomy. The emotional manipulator drains you of the ability to act without permission. And in some cases, once you've been isolated, they will begin to position themselves as your legal proxy, financial decision-maker, or primary contact, setting up the final phase of control. If this sounds extreme, consider how common it is in elder abuse cases across the world. The predator is not a mugger in the night. It's the caretaker who slowly erodes the will and the world of the person they claim to love. From a Stoic point of view, this is the highest betrayal, not just of trust, but of your inner rational nature. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself," and that freedom begins with recognizing when your thoughts, your choices, your voice are no longer yours. So how do you protect yourself? First, audit your relationships with brutal honesty. Has your world shrunk since this person entered it? Do you find yourself second-guessing your own voice? Have you lost contact with those who once loved and supported you because of someone else's influence? Second, reclaim your independence one step at a time. Speak for yourself, even if your voice trembles. Reconnect with people who once knew you. Ask questions. Share your concerns. And if necessary, leave, even if it feels like you're abandoning the only lifeline you have. Because it's not a lifeline, it's a leash. The Stoics didn't preach detachment. They preached discipline. And that discipline includes emotional sovereignty. Yes, accept love. Yes, lean on others. But never surrender your ability to see clearly and choose freely. Because love, when weaponized, becomes a slow poison. And if someone is wrapping their control in the language of care, what they're building around you isn't safety. It's a cage. The moment you recognize it is the moment you begin to escape. Sign 3. They want your assets. Not all predators come with fists or fury. Some arrive with folders, smiles, and suggestions that seem practical, helpful, even responsible. They don't scream or threaten. They speak in the calm, convincing language of paperwork. And by the time you realize what they've taken, it's not your body that's bruised. It's your autonomy, your security, your legacy. Because they didn't just want to help. They wanted everything you've built. This is the danger of the resource controller. They don't rob you in one bold moment. They walk you, slowly and gently, into surrender. It begins when you're vulnerable, after a loss, a diagnosis, a season of fatigue. They offer to help with bills, simplify your documents, manage your appointments. They propose that you add their name to an account, list them on your insurance, give them access to your medical records. Just in case. It sounds wise. It feels safe. But behind this facade of protection is a methodical dismantling of your financial independence. In Stoic philosophy, true peace comes not from possessions, but from clarity. Epictetus reminded us, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Yet when someone else begins to want what you have, and wants it more than they want your well-being, your clarity becomes the first thing they target. They overwhelm you with complexity, making simple things sound too difficult for you to manage alone. They present themselves as the only one who can understand the situation. And gradually you stop making decisions altogether. You stop reading the fine print. You stop asking questions. This is not protection. This is preparation. Not for your safety, but for your exit. Gerald, a widowed retiree, learned this too late. His nephew, charming and supportive, stepped in after his wife died, offering to help organize his affairs. Gerald, grateful and tired, accepted. Over time, his accounts were merged, his documents rewritten, and his control quietly dissolved. When his health declined, decisions were made without his consent, and legally it all looked voluntary. But what Gerald didn't realize is that he had signed away his voice. Stoicism teaches us that the mind must remain our strongest fortress. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But the resource controller doesn't need to break your mind. They only need to make you doubt it. They thrive on your gratitude, your guilt, your confusion. They feed off your willingness to be polite. And once they've embedded themselves in your financial world, every layer of resistance you once had becomes harder to access. The most chilling part is that they don't act like villains. They are calm, patient, helpful. They don't isolate you with force. They simply convince you that involving others would be complicated, that simplifying things through them is smarter. And little by little, they position themselves at the center of your decisions, until you're not making any at all. From a Stoic perspective, this is a desecration of self-governance. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is a slave to his dependencies." And when someone else quietly assumes responsibility for your affairs, you don't just lose your money, you lose your freedom. You lose your capacity to choose, and you lose it under the illusion of being cared for. So you must ask the hard questions. Is this person empowering you or taking over? Are they making things clearer or more confusing? Do you still feel in control? Or have you slowly been led into a silence that feels too heavy to break? Because when someone wants you gone, they don't always reach for a weapon. Sometimes all they need is a moment of access and a trusting heart that's too tired to read the fine print. The Stoic response is not fear, but focus. Take your time. Delay major decisions. Involve more than one voice. Do not allow yourself to be rushed. And above all, listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. The hands that say they're helping should never be the only ones holding the pen. True support respects your boundaries. It doesn't blur them. It stands beside you, not over your signature. Because in the end, when your clarity is gone, so is your freedom. And once that freedom disappears, the person you were goes with it. Sign 4. They poison your circle. If someone wanted to destroy your life, but couldn't reach you directly, how would they do it? They'd go after the people around you. They wouldn't confront you head-on. They'd quietly reshape how others see you, slowly turning your closest allies into skeptics, and your strongest relationships into sources of doubt. This is the tactic of the network infiltrator, the one who poisons your circle, not with accusations, but with carefully planted whispers. And by the time you realize what they've done, it's often too late. You're already standing alone. In high-conflict divorce cases, psychologists often refer to this tactic as triangulation, a form of manipulation where one person uses a third party to control or destabilize the second. But the network infiltrator takes it even further. They don't just want to discredit you. They want to dismantle the support system that would have protected you from them. Their goal is to isolate you so thoroughly that when they finally act, when they make the final move, there will be no one left to question their story. And the most terrifying part is that you almost never see it happening. You just start noticing small things. A friend who stops calling, a sibling who becomes cold, a coworker who once confided in you suddenly avoids eye contact. You feel the shift before you understand it. And when you try to explain your unease to someone else, it sounds like you're overreacting. But what you're feeling isn't delusion, it's design. The Stoics warned us about such distortions, not only in the world, but in perception. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake or any thought of mine, I shall gladly change, for it is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone." But what happens when someone rewrites the truth about you? Not to your face, but in private rooms where you're not allowed to speak for yourself. That's how the network infiltrator operates. They don't use force, they use influence. They approach those closest to you with concern. They express worry. They imply, they suggest that maybe you're not doing well. Maybe you've changed. Maybe you're unstable, or selfish, or dangerous in subtle ways. Not enough to alarm, just enough to sow confusion. And confusion spreads faster than truth. In a family, they might claim they're just looking out for you, while quietly driving a wedge between you and your siblings. In a workplace, they might express subtle doubts about your competency, gently question your behavior, and position themselves as the reasonable alternative. In a friendship circle, they might present themselves as the loyal one who hates drama, while quietly feeding each friend a slightly different version of your story, ensuring that you seem inconsistent, untrustworthy, or emotionally unstable. By the time you catch on, you're no longer part of the conversation. You've become a narrative, a cautionary tale, one that they authored. From a Stoic point of view, this tactic is deeply corrosive because it attacks what the Stoics held sacred: community built on virtue, trust, and truth. Marcus Aurelius taught us to be strict with yourself and tolerant with others, but he also warned that we must remain awake to manipulation. Tolerance does not mean blindness. It does not mean silence in the face of a quiet assault on your reputation. So how do you know when someone is poisoning your circle? Look for patterns. Look for sudden distance between you and the people you used to trust. Listen for shifts in tone, in the kinds of questions you're being asked, in the way others respond when you share your thoughts. If people in your life begin treating you as if you're unstable, dangerous, or unreliable, but without any clear incident to justify that shift, it's worth considering whether someone else is shaping that perception behind the scenes. And remember, the infiltrator does not always operate out of hatred. Sometimes they are driven by envy, sometimes by resentment, sometimes by the need for control. But in all cases, their strategy is the same: make you unprotected. Psychologically, this is one of the most effective and least detectable forms of abuse. It leaves no bruises. It creates no obvious conflict, but it makes the target more vulnerable to future harm, whether emotional, financial, or even physical. Because when you are isolated, you become easier to gaslight, easier to manipulate, and easier to remove without anyone asking questions. The Stoics would not advise retaliation, but they would demand that you see clearly. You must begin to document what you're experiencing, not for revenge, but for sanity. Write down what's being said, by whom, and when. Re-establish direct lines of communication with those you trust. Refuse to be edited out of your own story. Speak the truth calmly, directly, and repeatedly. Because the longer you remain silent, the more your silence becomes their evidence. And if the infiltrator continues to twist your image, you must be willing to walk away. Not just from them, but from any environment that rewards their deception. The Stoics believed that integrity is the only real possession we have. You must protect yours, even if it costs you the approval of people who have already been turned against you. In this battle, your clarity is your weapon, and your ability to remain grounded in truth is your shield. You cannot control how others interpret your life, but you can ensure that you are living it with honor. The network infiltrator wants you to implode. They want your relationships to rot from within. And then, when something happens to you, when your health fails or your reputation collapses, they will not look guilty. They will look concerned, sympathetic, blameless, and if you're not careful, the story that survives won't be yours. So pay attention. Rebuild where you can. Confront calmly, but do not allow falsehoods to stand unchallenged. Because in this kind of quiet warfare, staying connected is not just comfort, it is survival. And the moment you are truly alone, that's when the final move will be made. Sign 5. They plan your accident. There is a kind of evil that doesn't shout. It doesn't storm into the room or leave bruises. It smiles. It offers to carry your groceries. It fixes your porch light. It drives you home after a long day. It tells your friends and neighbors how worried it is about you. And when your life begins to fall apart, when tragedy strikes, when you're found unconscious at the bottom of the stairs or behind the wheel of a car that suddenly lost its brakes, this person is the first to speak, the first to explain what happened, the first to receive sympathy, because everyone already knows how much they cared. This is not fiction. This is how calculated predators operate. These are not people acting out of passion or momentary rage. These are individuals who have already decided that your end would be convenient, necessary, or profitable, and now all they need is for it to look natural. This is not someone who might harm you. This is someone who has already rehearsed how, and they start small. That's what makes it so insidious. They don't cut the brake line right away. First, they observe. They gain your trust. They show up consistently, always helpful, always concerned. Then, quietly, they begin testing your boundaries. They forget to lock a door. They leave medication out of order. They encourage you to take a shortcut at night or skip your seatbelt just once. They suggest you sleep with a window open. They make mistakes that you notice, but don't question, because you don't want to be rude. You don't want to seem paranoid. This isn't negligence. It's calibration. They're learning how much you'll ignore, how easily you second-guess yourself, how many things you'll dismiss as forgetfulness or bad luck. They are measuring your tolerance for discomfort, for uncertainty, for risk. And every time you say nothing, they move one step closer to action. We see this in the story of Alan, a retired Navy veteran who lived alone after his wife passed away. A younger neighbor began helping around the house, fixing minor things, bringing groceries, offering rides. Alan appreciated the support, especially as his health declined. But then things began to shift. His garage door was found open in the morning, even though he was sure he'd closed it. His prescriptions got mixed up. His car nearly lost control before a mechanic discovered a frayed brake line. But even then, Alan didn't speak up. He blamed himself, thought he was being dramatic, and then he fell down the stairs. At first, he believed it was just an accident, a loose rug, until he remembered that rug had been nailed down for years. Still, he told no one. Not until his niece visited weeks later and noticed documents missing, mail rearranged, and small-town rumors circulating about Alan's supposed confusion. When she pushed further, the truth began to unravel. Investigators eventually discovered forged documents and evidence that the helpful neighbor had been planning a full financial takeover of Alan's estate. It hadn't been a question of if. It had been when. That's how these predators work. They don't want confrontation. They want credibility. They want to be the one others trust, the one who's already explained your downfall before anyone else even suspects it. They play the long game, not just by orchestrating the event, but by shaping the narrative around it. And when something finally happens, they are positioned as the grieving helper, the one who tried so hard to be there for you, the one who saw the signs of your supposed decline. And in the public's eyes, they become the victim of your misfortune. Not the cause. The Stoics would not call this paranoia. They would call it pattern recognition. Seneca warned us, "A sword never kills anybody. It is merely the weapon in the killer's hand." In this case, the sword is circumstance, and it's sharpened with subtlety, disguised as concern and wielded with terrifying calm. Stoicism teaches us not to fear death, but it also teaches us to prepare wisely, to protect the flame of reason, to guard our judgment, and to see clearly, even when the truth is hard. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing." Life is messy, and danger often wears the face of a friend. If you feel a growing unease around someone who is overly involved in your safety, who insists on helping in ways that make you feel smaller, less capable, more dependent, listen to that signal. That discomfort is not weakness. It is wisdom knocking. Calculated predators don't rely on force. They rely on you dismissing your instincts. They rely on your politeness, your fear of being dramatic, your need to be liked, and slowly, they build a reality where they are always near and always one step ahead. This is where the Stoic must act, not with rage, not with accusation, but with absolute clarity and calm preparation. Change the locks. Tell someone what you've noticed. Keep a record of anything suspicious. Remove their access to your documents, your keys, your decisions. If you suspect something deeper, don't hesitate to involve law enforcement. Trust your gut. Not because it's emotional, but because it's ancient. It's the part of you that survived danger for generations. It knows. It always knows. If you are alone, reconnect. If you are unsure, delay decisions. If you are being watched, act unpredictably. And if you are being manipulated, start documenting now. Don't wait until the story is written for you. Because here's the hard truth. When someone wants you gone, they don't need to get their hands dirty. All they need is a timeline, a narrative, and a person too tired or too trusting to notice that the pieces have been arranged to fall. Right on cue. If you've made it this far, you already know. This wasn't just a warning. It was a wake-up call. The silent observer, the emotional manipulator, the resource controller, the network infiltrator, the calculated predator. These aren't just labels. They're real threats, and they often hide behind familiar faces. You're not paranoid. You're aware, and in a world where harm is often disguised as care, that awareness is your first shield. But Stoicism teaches us that clarity must lead to action. Protect your space. Guard your patterns. Stop oversharing online. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. Marcus Aurelius said, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do." So take this seriously. Too many people said, "It could never happen to me," until it did. Don't let your story end that way. This isn't entertainment. This is survival. Subscribe now. Stay awake. Stay protected. Your life might depend on it.